Hi there. My name is John Baumgart. Today I wanted to speak about the censoring of Donald Trump on Twitter, Facebook, across all social media, and provide my opinion. Now, my opinion may be controversial or it will go against perhaps the mainstream grain of thought, but really I'm not here to win fans on either side. So I have plenty of criticism for both sides of the aisle. What I want to do is, as objectively as possible, explain my viewpoint, looking at things from all sides. So, to begin with my thoughts and the reason I'm opposed, and I think that this decision was a massive error, is that I feel it had little to do with protecting people or anything of that nature. I feel it was purely political. If you were following what's been going on with social media companies in the last couple of years, there's been pressure, government pressure, also perhaps from some users, but I would say mostly internally, to consider breaking up these monopolies. And if you want my opinion, I think the main motivation was political, that the companies felt if they were to, follow what the government wants and get rid of someone who has been causing them trouble, they'll be rewarded with less scrutiny when this comes into discussion again. Now, that's just my speculation, but I definitely don't think it has to do with safety or protection or any of this nonsense. I think that's just a cover because I feel these companies are motivated to stay in business and they understand that there's a new administration, and if they can start off fresh by delivering them, let's say, Donald Trump immediately, that they'll look the other way. Now, in my view, you can't ever expect loyalty in many cases. So, we'll see if that pays out or not. I'm going to speak more, though, about why I think this is a Pyrrhic victory, meaning that perhaps it's a short-term win, but a long-term loss, for the country, for all hands involved. And so I have some, points as to why I feel this was a mistake. But before I jump into them, what I first wanted to do is just discuss a little bit more about free speech, how it works, my thoughts on it. I mean, I'm going to speak about it more in the terms of social media because just the subject of free speech, I mean, there's books upon books, volumes of libraries written, and obviously I'm not going to talk about the history or anything, just mention how it applies in this case to what's going on now. So I would say that, this year has been, or better said, 2020, so in the last year or so, has been a very difficult year for the country. There's a lot of crazy things that have happened outside of a pandemic. And so a lot of things have been going on. I mean, ever since Trump took presidency, I would say that a lot of things have changed. And so you will often hear people say, well, free speech is a conservative issue now, it's a Republican thing. And I wanted to first tackle that and address that. The reason that you're hearing that, and that the reason that conservatives are mostly the ones who are complaining about it, is they're the only ones being censored. And so, to kind of understand this, I think it would be helpful to look at social costs. I think if one is to understand someone else's perspective or side, you have to look at society at large. And I boil this down to what I call social costs. So what do I mean by that? What are social costs? So let's take the George Floyd protests as an example. So around the time of the George Floyd protests and afterwards, it was very common for people to come out in support of Black Lives Matter. Now, this is a whole can of worms. I don't want to get into it. Maybe I'll make a future video about it. But just the name itself, I mean, everyone would be in favor of that. Otherwise, really, you're a racist. Now, the organization itself, and this is where you can easily get into trouble, that's a different story. And there's ongoing debate, even in the Black community, about that. But in general, during these protests, to come out and say, I support Black Lives Matter, had a social benefit. And I'm referring to social media, that's the subject here. Also in real life, but mostly there. That if you said it on Facebook, if you announced it, you were rewarded with praise, albeit electronic praise, which I don't think is very meaningful, but you were rewarded with praise, okay? And it was so much the case that there was many businesses, companies that really have nothing to do with civil rights or anything of that nature, who were chastised for a sin of omission, meaning if they didn't come out and support, they were threatened to be boycotted or to lose clients. And I think even a yoga studio in California, I mean, I can't remember exactly the details, but I believe they may have gone out of business or lost clients because they didn't make an announcement. As if anyone cares what a yoga studio has to say about that. So you can see there was a social benefit there. So that's a social benefit to come out and also attack Donald Trump. Also on these media platforms, for the most part, has benefits. I mean, if now that he's not president anymore, but during his presidency, if you made a fresh account that just attacked him and was critical of his policies, it was much easier to get likes, to get mentions. Naturally, there was opposition, of course, but it was very easy, and I think you could easily move your way up by just being against the president. I mean, look, even at comedy, most of it on the main shows is just bashing him. It didn't really require much creativity, in my opinion. So these are social benefits. Now, what's a social cost? Okay, I've only outlined the benefits. A cost is at the moment, supporting the previous president, wearing a MAGA hat, for example. Now, even I have a cost in the sense that I'm not supporting him, but I'll explain that I kind of support the underdog or those under attack because, as I'll soon mention, political winds change. But for now, that's a dicey issue. And I'm not supporting him. But imagine, for example, if you go in a very blue area that's mostly liberal, and you put on a Trump hat. Now I'm talking about real life. I mean, that's a potential cost. You can get beat up. Who knows what can happen? But at a minimum, you'll get harassed. Some restaurants may not serve you. So there is a cost socially, and on these platforms, while they have their own groups and they are segmented, going toe to toe with someone who doesn't agree with you or having a MAGA hat in your online profile, your avatar, I mean, that automatically attracts a lot of attack. Now, I think this is a little bit different from my previous description of Black Lives Matter, especially when it's a two-party system. I don't want to get into that, but I'm just saying that in the previous election, there were only two choices. However, just vocalizing support for one would get a lot of scorn from certain people. And in my opinion, I don't think this is healthy for the country. Now, you can argue that, well, Trump galvanizes a lot of this, wearing the hat represents racism, and I'm here to push back and say, I think there can be many reasons that someone can come out and support Donald Trump. I would strongly argue against the racist accusation. I think that's well overplayed, and yes, there are racists who support him, but he received millions upon millions of votes. I believe it was 70 million during the election. And it's ignorant to say every single one of those voters is a racist. And like I mentioned, especially when you're not given any other choice. I mean, if you have two choices, then some people are going to go for the other choice for a variety of reasons. But like I mentioned, this has a cost. So I brought up this whole point of cost to show that right now, there is a skew, at least, or there is a bias against those who support Trump. And I find this unhealthy. And it's very obvious that the social media platforms generally prefer those on the left-hand side of the aisle who don't argue in favor of Donald Trump, obviously, and attack him. So it's obvious with this in mind that many conservatives, many libertarians, for different reasons, but many on that side of the aisle come out in favor of free speech because they're the only ones who are at least being shadow banned, silenced, whatever you want to call it. Keep the social costs in mind. It's very easy to go on Twitter and say the president is awful. You'll just get rewarded with likes. But doing the opposite, you get a lot of vitriol. So that's why currently this issue is mostly on that side. They're, for lack of a better term, the minority voice. But that's always what free speech is out to protect. And as I'll get into, that could change. But I mention this because there's been a long history of free speech, and until recently, we kind of had normal, I would say, guidelines about it. I mean, what to me is a litmus test or a sign that this has gone too far is the ACLU came out, defending Trump in the sense that he shouldn't have been banned, and they've kind of gone a little bit, I would say, drinking the woke Kool-Aid or whatever lately, which is even more the case because something that I think is worth mentioning is in the 70s, which was a long time ago, the ACLU also defended a kind of neo-Nazi group, or whatever you want to call them, National Socialist, from having a march in Illinois where there was many Jews living there. And obviously that was contentious. However, they respected, as horrible as those viewpoints are, they respected their right to a peaceful assembly. Now just imagine in 2021 that happened. That couldn't happen. There would be riots. And that shows where the country is now in terms of tolerance, as much as people, kind of pretend to be tolerant and open and claim diversity, as long as it's not diversity of opinion. So the other part is, before I get into the reasons why I think it was a mistake, is the system worked. I mean, yes, I think it was terrible what Donald Trump said. I find that there's far worse things being said on Twitter, but he's facing an impeachment. I don't know what's going to happen as of this video. So he received his own punishment for this, which means that you don't necessarily need to involve social media or allow them to be the arbiter of who can talk and who can't, because he crossed a line and now he's facing an impeachment for it. And on that note, I just think that it's very difficult for social media companies to try to be censors, but up until lately, they've been completely inconsistent. And once again, I'm going to sound like I'm a Trump supporter. I'm not. I'm just pointing out the contradiction that when you had the Covington case, for example, something that I followed closely, it was one of my first points where I really began questioning mainstream media and wondering if I should be paying attention. When that came out, there was all kinds of crazy things on Twitter. I remember a Disney executive said something about, let's put them all into wood chippers with a little drawing. I mean, his account is still there. One commentary I listened to said that the Ayatollah in Iran, he still has an account up. And if you look at his feed, he calls for exterminating people. I don't want to say exactly because I don't want to get my video shut down. There's plenty of examples. Kathy Newman, she had ahead of Donald Trump. I mean, she caught a lot of flack for that, but her account is still active. So, I don't think it's easy to be a judge of who should be able to speak and who shouldn't. But my point is, it's completely inconsistent. I mean, there is all kinds of violence and other things that you could read into that are probably being tweeted right now, and those accounts won't get shut down. So I find it completely inconsistent. But that's, before bringing out the main points, I'm just showing that I agree it's a difficult job, but I don't think these companies have any kind of standard, because if they did, then there would be a lot of different groups who are being shut down, and we're not seeing that. So now I want to get into why I think this was a mistake, why I'm against this decision. Now, my first point is something I've been alluding to, that political winds change. And so it was politically expedient for these companies to do this now, especially with an incoming Biden administration. But similar to my criticism of the Patriot Act, the main reason I didn't like it is once this thing is in law, then any crappy leader in the future is going to have their hands on it. And now that we've set a precedent, not we, but the social media companies have set a precedent, who gets to be censored next? And for all of those who don't like Trump and view this as a victory, just wait, because like I said, the political winds change, and these tech companies are not your friends. They may have a certain leaning now, and they may say things that you like to hear, but to save their own skin, I guarantee you, at a dime, they would censor whoever else would be unpopular, and that may be a character, or man, woman, whatever, that you like. And so I'm mentioning this as a warning, because right now it's Donald Trump. But now that, let's say, the first virtual guillotine has gone down and someone is silenced, do you think it's going to stop there? I mean, this was happening before, and people were warning it's only the beginning, and they were, very much advocating the first kind of bans, and lo and behold, those people were right. So I extend a word of caution that you can jump up and down and say how great it is that Donald Trump is silenced, but just wait, political winds change, and sooner or later it's going to be someone that you like, someone who may have completely different viewpoints, and guess what? You'll be powerless to do anything, because you can see these companies have the power to silence a president. So next thing is, our country is already divided, extremely divided, more so than I can say in my lifetime. Online, more so than in real life. I think it's a funny thing that, it's why I don't participate in social media. I have another video about that, but these people behind their phones or whatever can be so angry, and I bet if they bumped into each other on the street, not knowing their political affiliations, they'd be friendly. So I can't say that it's so much in person, but there's definitely a divide in information and everything else, and where people get their news and everything. So it's more, not so much a face-to-face divide, but, and granted, violent clashes have happened, but I'd say it's more a divide on information, on news, on who you support, and it's come to the point where, people are having trouble just speaking to the other side. And that's why I say, when I make this, I will probably say things that Trump supporters won't like to hear, nor will those, who support Joe Biden or Democrats like to hear. I'm trying to explain objectively, because I think both parties are extremely flawed. So this is only going to cement division. The whole reason that you had a app like Parler come up in the first place was the social media company's own fault. If they just tolerated, various viewpoints and didn't do things like shadow banning and other, creative methods to silence people, there wouldn't have been a demand for another platform, which I felt was unhealthy, because for the reasons I mentioned previously, the only people who are going to join Parler are those whose voices are suppressed. So now you're just siphoning off the people. You have one camp where everyone agrees with each other, and now you have another camp. That's not healthy. That is just further eliminating dialogue and reinforcing bad ideas. So it's very unhealthy to kick ideas out. I mean, the main theme, if there's any, that I can mention from this whole point is ideas need to come out. They need to be heard. It's unhealthy to suppress them. I mean, the whole reason that you don't hear so much anymore about the Klan is that they were allowed, not so much now. I mean, I think they're a dead movement, but in the past, like in my example in the 70s, they were allowed to let their horrible ideas out in public. People could realize what they're saying was nonsense, and they have died out. But once you take a group and once you silence them, that's a different story. And so, that leads to my third point, that as soon as you silence Donald Trump, you have now rewarded every conspiracy theory with what they have been putting all of their chips on for a long time. Every single person that said that they were out to get him, not really defining they, and it's very vague. Now you've given them exactly what they want. You've reinforced very bad ideas. Now, if these ideas were all exchanged and aired, it would be easier. I'm not saying impossible, because we're always going to have some conspiracy theories, but it would at least be easier to have a discussion and debunk them and have some kind of healthy dialogue. But that's gone now. And so all of these people with their crazy ideas have now been vindicated. And that is not healthy for the country. So, if you like that guy with the bullhorns, you just made 25 more of them in all the states, because now they feel that, they were right all along. And I'll even give you an example. So I'm going to put on my conspiracy hat. So look, I actually wear this hat. It's not for just conspiracy theories. But I'm going to put on my conspiracy hat so you can understand how very radical viewpoints are now going to be discussed, not in one public area, but who knows, on a different channel or underground. And they're going to say something to the effect of, now, this is the conspiracy person talking, well, of course they wanted to silence Donald Trump. Of course they did. Why? Because he should have won the election. It was stolen from him. Just think about what happened in the last couple of years. We had this pandemic, right? Where did this virus come from? It came from China. And where was Trump very much opposed to? What did he want to do? You know what? He wanted to, fight against China. He didn't like China. And very strange that right around the time of an election, a virus comes out of China and it destroys all the economic growth that this president had. It ruined everything and made it very easy for someone who's soft on China, whose son has dealings with China, to become elected. Not only that, if you remember, Donald Trump was, criticizing the post office, trying to threaten to take money. So you don't think it was possible? You really don't think that some of those postal workers who knew that if they didn't do something, they may lose their job under a Trump administration, wouldn't maybe throw away some of the ballots, stuff a few there? I mean, they're all coming in the mail anyway, aren't they? Because of the pandemic? Isn't that strange? You have a pandemic and a lot of ballots are in the mail and you have a lot of post office workers. They're all kind of worried about losing their job. So that's just an example of jumping to crazy conclusions. All that is nonsense. But when you siphon off and don't allow people to have productive conversations and demonize them, they can lead to those conclusions. It only takes a few radicals to connect dots in people's minds. And a lot of the things that those people said, or that I said in my kind of imitation, I think people would agree with and could easily put together as some form of conspiracy. That's not to mention the fact that we have so many problems going on with trust and otherwise that on both sides of the aisle, when it does sound like a conspiracy theory, there is some hint of truth to it. So it becomes even more confusing. So this is just the worst time ever in a pandemic. They're going to silence people's voices. So that's the other argument I have where I think it's a bad idea, is now you've given, carte blanche for all the conspiracy people to run crazy. Because now where are they going to go, And that's my last point, is you're going to send very dangerous ideas and conspiracy people underground. I mean, the biggest mistake that people made with Alex Jones is now that they don't hear from him, now that the average person doesn't hear of Alex Jones, they assume that no one listens to him. That just means you don't hear from him. You think that crazy guy in the horns is listening to CNN and Fox News for his information? Come on, you have to be kidding me. If these groups of people are now relegated to who knows where, these underground places that are going to pop up, now you have no idea what's being said. At least when you could track them on a few platforms like Facebook, Twitter, you could build a profile of somebody. But they're leaving this en masse. If you banned the person who's their leader, even though I think in some cases he doesn't want them to be their leader, well, where are they going to go to now? They're going to go underground, and now you're really not going to know what they're saying. And that's dangerous for the country, because then we can have some serious problems. It was much better when everyone was on a platform. So, this is why I am against this. I think it was a very bad decision. And my outlook was very objective. If there's any enemy in my mind, I think it is these tech companies. I grew up at a time when the internet was first coming out. And the idea then was very much what I used to associate with liberalism, but I don't anymore. I think it's changed. I think back then, liberalism was kind of like the hippie guy in Beavis and Butthead. It was about being nice to one another. Everyone is great. Let's try to have peace. And the idea of the internet was, here is a place we can all share ideas, we can all connect. You know, it was a very utopian with a mix of hippie idealism. And what did we get? What do we have now? I mean, what's come out of there is what we often associate, it's a caricature of Republicans, is a massive profit-seeking, oligarchy that cares nothing about anything but, generating more and more money, even if that means violating civil liberties, you know, not, doing everything they can with data, being authoritarian in the sense of silencing people, deleting accounts en masse. I mean, this is anything but liberalism. And the fact that, people still trust these companies, rally to them, consider them allies because they've done these things, I think is very foolish. I have no trust in these companies. I haven't decided what I think is best in terms of how to deal with them, but I absolutely don't think they should go around deciding who should speak and who shouldn't speak. But if there's anyone to blame for a lot of our problems, then these tech companies are also complicit. And as a last thought, everyone mentions how, oh well, Donald Trump is a horrible person and everything else, but who is the one that constantly made him the center of attention? It was a combination of traditional corporate media and then social media. I mean, if it wasn't for Twitter, if it wasn't for that app, he would not be president. He's president because of Twitter. That's their Frankenstein. And conveniently, after he's made, billions of dollars for all Twitter investors, now he's just thrown out because he's no longer useful. So, I can't say that it's only the tech companies. There's a lot more parts, but I am, hypercritical of them. I think, Silicon Valley and everything it represents has turned from this hippie idealism, which you did see in people like Steve Jobs to an extent. Bill Gates, even when he founded, he was this idealistic person, to now pure authoritarianism and greed. And that's nothing at all like what we were lent to believe. So we'll see what happens in the future. As a positive note, I've been learning more about blockchain. I think that could be the kind of democratizing way of taking the internet out of this. My last thoughts are, and I speak often with friends, and I have another video on social media, that growing up, I like the internet. I like it now, minus the social component. It's the only thing I don't like. I just think it's done a lot to ruin the internet, but it's still a great tool. I'm not a Luddite. I want it to exist. I don't mind if social media is there, but I think it's caused a lot of our problems, and it will create even more in the future. So that was my rant. Let me know what you think in your comments. Good, bad, I don't mind. I am open to hearing anything. So thank you very much for your time.